Hello there. My name is Betty, and I'd like to share some personal experiences involving my mother-in-law. To protect our identities due to the uniqueness of our story, which might easily reveal who we are, I'm using pseudonyms. As I've grown older, the idea of drawing too much attention has become overwhelming, so I'd prefer to keep our identities confidential. Let's dive into my tale. My mother-in-law, whom I'll call Elizabeth, was never fond of me from the start. She adored her son, Daniel, but her feelings changed drastically when I became pregnant during our college years. Despite our carefulness, life had its unexpected plans. Daniel and I welcomed our daughter, Mary, when we were both 20 and still in college. Mary's arrival was a surprise and temporarily threw our lives off course, but our love for her was boundless. We decided to marry before her birth. My family offered their full support and embraced their new roles as grandparents with open arms. However, Elizabeth was far from supportive. She frequently criticized and belittled us, directing her harshest words at me and accusing me of ruining her son's future for my gain. Daniel and I faced these challenges together, asserting that Mary was a gift to us, despite Elizabeth's harsh stance. Elizabeth's negativity wasn't just aimed at me, she also showed a lack of warmth towards Mary. Initially, we hoped Elizabeth would come to accept the situation once she had some time to adjust. After all, she was a busy high school teacher, and the news of the pregnancy and our marriage had placed her in a difficult spot, causing resentment. Despite the ongoing challenges, Daniel and I managed to complete our college education with substantial support from my family, while Elizabeth remained distant, barely engaging with us. We hoped for a relationship between Mary and her grandmother, maintaining minimal contact in the hope that things would improve. As time passed, we settled down in the same town as Elizabeth, hoping for a new beginning. Our journey was marked by ups and downs, but it was our love for each other and our daughter that kept us going, even in the face of adversity and judgment. My husband and I were both diligently working and providing a loving environment for our daughter. Elizabeth, over time, started to soften her approach towards us, making an effort to be polite, especially around Mary. Although Mary could feel Elizabeth's underlying coldness, she still harbored a desire for her grandmother to be a part of her life. A pivotal moment came when Mary was 18, and we had to move in with Elizabeth to assist her recovery from a serious accident. Initially, we saw this as an opportunity to mend our strained relationship. Elizabeth even showed kindness towards us, and given her role as the principal at Mary's school, they were in constant contact. However, our optimism was short-lived. We soon realized that Elizabeth's newfound warmth was a facade, a means to utilize our help until she was back on her feet. The situation took a dramatic turn for the worse a week after Elizabeth returned to her duties at the school. Mary came home devastated, tears streaming down her face. She revealed that Elizabeth had expelled her from school, accusing her of bullying a student Mary had never even interacted with. The shock and injustice of the situation left us speechless. Mary was distraught, faced with the uncertainty of how to complete her education so close to graduation. Our disbelief quickly turned to anger upon confirming that Elizabeth had indeed expelled Mary under false pretenses. We awaited Elizabeth's return home to confront her about her unjust decision. The confrontation was intense. I demanded an explanation for her actions, but Elizabeth refused to engage, her dismissiveness only fueling our frustration further. When pressed about the supposed bullying incident, her smug smirk revealed the truth of her deception. Daniel and I were aghast, and seeing Mary break down again ignited my fury anew. This ordeal exposed the depth of Elizabeth's hatred and her willingness to harm her granddaughter out of spite. It was a stark reminder of the lengths she would go to sever our ties, a manipulation that backfired, reinforcing our unity and determination to overcome her unjust actions. In the heat of the moment, I couldn't contain my fury at Elizabeth, questioning how she could treat her own granddaughter so harshly. Elizabeth, unfazed, claimed that her actions were to protect the reputation of her prestigious school, stating she couldn't let Mary, whom she demeaningly referred to, graduate from it as it would tarnish the school's image. Her words were a stark revelation of her cruel intentions towards Mary. Daniel and I were aghast at her callousness. Elizabeth went on to insult Mary further, labeling her birth as an accident and claiming she would amount to nothing, suggesting she belonged in a lesser school with no expectations placed upon her. Her laughter in the face of our distress was chilling. As I held Mary, comforting her while she wept from the harshness of Elizabeth's words, she remained with us, perhaps wanting to see the extent of her grandmother's animosity. Meanwhile, Daniel confronted his mother with disbelief and anger, incredulous at her willingness to sabotage her granddaughter's future over baseless reasons. Elizabeth's response was cold and dismissive. She insisted that we knew her feelings towards Mary and bluntly suggested that if we disagreed with her perspective, we were free to leave her house. She seemed to take a perverse satisfaction in telling us she no longer needed our help and preferred we cut all ties, going so far as to threaten eviction if we didn't vacate promptly. The shock and hurt from Elizabeth's actions and words left us reeling. It became painfully clear that Elizabeth's intermittent warmth towards us had always been transactional, motivated by her needs, whether for assistance or financial support. This realization struck us hard as we comforted Mary, trying to shield her from the cruel reality that her grandmother's affection was conditional and self-serving. At times, Elizabeth's need for assistance, especially during health crises, led us to mistakenly believe she desired any form of a positive relationship with us. Once she regained a semblance of control in her life, she didn't hesitate to remind us of what she perceived as our place. Not willing to endure a month under her hostility, I reached out to my parents who lived in the next town, and we relocated there within a week. In this process, Mary had to transfer to a new school, which unfortunately meant she lost a year. It was a challenging time for her, and we sought therapy to help her navigate through the trauma. Gradually, we moved beyond the painful episode, though the memory of Elizabeth's actions lingered. Over the next 13 years, life took many turns. Mary completed her schooling and went off to college. Following the passing of my parents, we inherited a significant sum, which we used to provide a better future for Mary. Daniel and I invested in a hospital, eventually earning places on its board. We balanced our careers and the hospital's management until Mary was ready to take over, allowing us to step into retirement. Elizabeth had become a distant memory, having had no contact with her for over a decade. However, an unexpected encounter occurred when Mary visited us one day, revealing she had run into Elizabeth at the hospital during a work-related visit. Initially, I was apprehensive about what Elizabeth could possibly want after all these years, especially since she had made it clear she wanted nothing to do with us. Mary shared that she had tried to avoid Elizabeth, but Elizabeth insisted on speaking with her. Despite Mary's reluctance to engage, she didn't want to cause a scene. Elizabeth's approach was surprising, addressing Mary affectionately as her sweet granddaughter and revealing that she was ill. This revelation was unexpected, considering Elizabeth's previous insistence on cutting ties. Mary's recount of the meeting left us both curious and wary about Elizabeth's motives and her sudden shift in demeanor. Hearing about Elizabeth's illness, Mary expressed a polite hope for her recovery, referring to her by name. This didn't sit well with Elizabeth, who insisted on being called Granny, expecting familial warmth despite years of estrangement. Mary, who had grown into a discerning and intelligent young woman, wasn't fooled by Elizabeth's sudden display of affection. She knew better than to fall for what seemed like a calculated attempt to rekindle a relationship for ulterior motives. Mary's response was measured yet distant. She calmly explained that the absence of any meaningful relationship over the past 13 years didn't warrant such familial titles, leaving Elizabeth visibly taken aback. Elizabeth's attempt to manipulate the situation in a public setting, hoping to garner sympathy or perhaps coerce Mary into a pretense of closeness, had clearly failed. Attempting to salvage her image, Elizabeth played the card of the misunderstood, lonely old woman who had supposedly always loved her granddaughter. However, Mary, armed with a clear memory and a strong sense of self, quickly countered this narrative. She reminded Elizabeth of her harsh words and actions in the past, highlighting the deliberate distance Elizabeth had maintained. Elizabeth, now flustered and caught off guard by Mary's assertiveness and the attention of onlookers, tried to laugh it off, claiming any past harshness was spoken in anger and should be forgiven. But Mary, prioritizing her dignity and well-being over false family bonds, excused herself politely, indicating her busy life and responsibilities took precedence over rehashing the past. This encounter, recounted with a mix of astonishment and humor, left no room for sympathy towards Elizabeth from our side. Daniel, aware of his mother's capacity for cruelty, couldn't defend her actions. While it might have seemed like closure to Mary and Daniel, I sensed that our dealings with Elizabeth's drama were not yet concluded. True to my intuition, Elizabeth made an unexpected appearance at our home a week later. It was a weekend morning, a time she cleverly chose, knowing full well that Mary and her husband, who regularly visited for family days, would be with us. Despite the passage of time, Elizabeth seemed to have retained her knack for showing up unannounced, standing at our doorstep with a mix of nervousness and determination. I greeted her with a hint of sarcasm, pointing out the irony of her visit given her previous insistence on severing ties with us. Elizabeth's reply was sharp. She was here to see Daniel and Mary, claiming that our past disagreements were irrelevant to her desire to reconnect with them. I allowed her in, partly out of curiosity and partly to prevent her from potentially bothering Mary elsewhere. The surprise and discomfort were palpable as Elizabeth entered, greeted by Daniel's straightforward refusal to partake in pleasantries. Mary and her husband remained stoically silent, offering no warm welcomes. Elizabeth's attempt at casual conversation fell flat. Her claim of missing the family met with skepticism and direct questions about her true intentions. In response to Elizabeth's plea for civility, citing her status as Mary's grandmother, I reminded her of the reality of our non-existent relationship. It was clear that Elizabeth's sudden interest in mending fences was driven by more than just familial longing. When confronted with the blunt question of what she truly sought, Elizabeth attempted to appeal to a sense of family, expressing a desire for reconciliation now that she found herself aging and presumably alone. Daniel's response was tinged with skepticism, pressing Elizabeth for the real reasons behind her sudden change of heart. Elizabeth's appeal to sentimentality, suggesting that her advanced age and solitude warranted kindness and perhaps forgiveness, was met with resistance. Mary, too, questioned the sincerity of Elizabeth's motives, highlighting the timing of her outreach as conveniently coinciding with her health issues. Despite the guarded atmosphere, Elizabeth perceived this as an opening to lay out her true intentions, mistakenly believing she could negotiate her way back into the family's life, not for genuine connection but for her own benefit, a strategy that was quickly becoming transparent to everyone present. Elizabeth's visit, initially shrouded in mystery, quickly unveiled its true motive. With an air of reluctant admission, she revealed her health woes, hoping to leverage her familial connection to Mary for financial assistance with her medical expenses. She appealed to Mary, suggesting that her position at the hospital could somehow facilitate discounted treatments, a notion that was met with incredulity and skepticism. Mary's response was straightforward, questioning why she should intervene in Elizabeth's healthcare matters, especially given their strained relationship. Elizabeth, undeterred, pressed further, hinting at financial hardships and the insufficiency of her retirement funds to cover her medical bills. She subtly suggested that Mary, by her board membership, could offer financial relief through discounts or other means. This revelation didn't come as a surprise. Elizabeth's actions were always guided by self-interest. Daniel and Mary, while taken aback by the audacity of the request, quickly saw through Elizabeth's guise of reconciliation. Mary, in particular, was incensed. Her anger was not just a reaction to Elizabeth's current audacity, but a culmination of years of hurt and manipulation. Elizabeth's plea, framing herself as a family in need, only fueled Mary's fury. Mary knew all too well the pain of her grandmother's past betrayals and the nearly devastating impact on her life and career. There was no chance she would let Elizabeth wield emotional leverage over her now. In a moment of intense clarity and resolve, Mary confronted Elizabeth's manipulative tactics head-on. She declared unequivocally that Elizabeth was no family to her, rebuking the very notion that there was any obligation to assist someone who had once sought to destroy her future. Elizabeth's attempt to play the repentant relative, insisting that she had changed and that past misdeeds should be forgotten, fell on deaf ears. Mary's stance was a testament to her strength and her refusal to be swayed by emotional manipulation, marking a definitive end to Elizabeth's influence over her life. Elizabeth attempted to soften the blow of Mary's rejection by claiming a change of heart and expressing pride in Mary's accomplishments. But Mary was quick to halt any such insinuations, emphasizing that her achievements were the result of her and her parents' diligence, not Elizabeth's. The notion that Elizabeth could waltz back into their lives, feign familial ties, and expect financial aid for her medical expenses was met with staunch resistance. Elizabeth, visibly shaken by the force of Mary's response, turned to Daniel in search of sympathy, lamenting the harshness of Mary's words and questioning Daniel's upbringing. Daniel, however, stood by Mary, affirming the values he had instilled in her: resilience and the understanding that family is defined by support and love, not merely shared blood. Elizabeth's plea to Daniel, invoking her role as his mother, fell on deaf ears. Daniel's retort underscored the irreparable harm Elizabeth had inflicted by abandoning them when they were most vulnerable. Her past actions had eroded any sense of familial duty or obligation, rendering her current plight a direct consequence of her choices. Even as Elizabeth pleaded for compassion, citing financial inability to cover her medical expenses, Daniel remained unmoved. The years had cemented a bitter truth. Elizabeth's reliability and trustworthiness were non-existent. Her appeals for assistance, met with rejection from Mary and Daniel, led her to desperately seek my sympathy. Elizabeth's tearful entreaty to me, invoking a shared understanding of a mother's pain, was met with outright rejection. I reminded her of the stark contrast between our actions as mothers. While I had been a steadfast support to my daughter, Elizabeth had chosen self-interest over family time, and again, her claim of regret and newfound remorse was too little, too late, an attempt to manipulate emotions for her benefit, an act we saw through clearly. Our family's resolve was unyielding, leaving Elizabeth to confront the consequences of her actions alone, her tearful performance failing to bridge the chasm her past behaviors had created. Elizabeth pleaded for forgiveness, blaming her stubbornness for the delayed outreach. She hoped for a collective pardon, suggesting that if I forgave her, perhaps Mary and Daniel would follow suit. However, the time for reconciliation had long passed. Elizabeth's actions had irrevocably severed any ties of kinship, leaving a chasm too wide to bridge with mere apologies. I informed her that her reconnection attempts were too little, too late. The family she had once turned her back on could not and would not entertain her pleas for clemency. Despite Elizabeth's tears and entreaties for a second chance, our stance remained firm. We ultimately resorted to threatening to call law enforcement to ensure her departure, underscoring the finality of our decision to cut her out of our lives. However, Elizabeth's resolve to reinsert herself into our lives didn't wane easily. She made several attempts to contact Mary, especially at the hospital, and even showed up at our home multiple times. Each instance was met with increased resistance, culminating in a police intervention that underscored our determination to maintain our distance. Elizabeth's persistence extended to approaching Mary's husband, mistakenly believing she could win him over, only to be met with staunch opposition due to his loyalty to Mary and awareness of Elizabeth's past actions. In time, we learned from Elizabeth's sister that she had relocated for medical treatment, a move spurred by mounting health concerns and financial desperation. Elizabeth's estrangement extended to her sister, a relationship marred by past transgressions, leaving her to face her challenges without familial support. Her financial and health predicaments deepened, leading to significant personal losses. While updates on Elizabeth's situation reached us, we chose to distance ourselves further, focusing on our family's well-being and future. The birth of Mary's child marked a new chapter for us, offering a fresh perspective on the importance of nurturing and protective familial bonds. My role as a grandmother affirmed the stark contrast between my approach to family and Elizabeth's neglectful behavior. This realization fortified our resolve to maintain the peace and stability we had fought hard to establish, ensuring that Elizabeth's shadow would no longer cast a pall over our lives.